Number 1. This event happened in the spring of 2015. So, I'm a young adult male living in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I joined a fairly popular BDSM website in January and was instantly drawn into the community. For those of you who don't know, BDSM is a variety of erotic practices involving bondage, dominance, submission, and masochism. Think 50 Shades of Grey if that helps. The community welcomes all kinks and fetishes alike, and everyone I've ever met from that site has been very welcoming and friendly. Except one. It all started with me coming across her profile. She was a gorgeous woman, very fit, with long legs and firm breasts. She was an older woman, but I was into that. I started by browsing her collection of photos, mostly fairly vanilla images of her sitting at a dining room table drinking a glass of wine and smiling at the camera. Real classy, which only urged me forward. I went ahead and messaged her. I wrote the usual greetings and offered to chat and get to know each other. She replied almost instantly. She greeted me as Sir, given the role I take. We continued to message back and forth for a week or two. She explained to me that she wanted me to be her master, since her last master died in a car accident. This was odd to me, but unfortunate accidents can happen to anyone, right? She continued giving me details of what she wanted me to do to her, and I very much obliged. The next couple of days, we kept trying to meet up for a coffee, but unfortunately, she had to cancel last minute every time. Eventually, I began getting very eager, as all the kinky discussion had gotten me worked up. So, late one night, she messages me, inviting me over to her place. She explained to me that she doesn't work in the morning, so we can be up all night having our fun. Well, being so worked up and not having the necessary blood flowing to my brain to make an educated decision, I agreed and asked for her address. She sent me her address, along with a phone number that she said was her home line, and I got ready to head out. So, I got into my car and I plugged the address into my GPS. This is where I noticed she lived in Hamilton, which is about 45 minutes away from Toronto. It's currently 1 AM, but this didn't bother me as I drove to Hamilton quite often, and considering I was spending the night, I could just leave in the morning. 45 minutes later, I find myself passing Hamilton. Okay, so it's a little further than that, no big deal. But then I reached a stretch of highway void of any streetlights. This is where I start to get concerned, as I only had my own headlights lighting the way. Suddenly, my GPS chimed in with the female voice indicating my exit. It was coming up on the right, and I feared driving into the darkness off the mild comfort of the highway. The exit took me into a long, dark stretch of country road. My warning lights start going off as I pass silhouettes of farmhouses and forestry, a good distance between each of them. My GPS chimed again, indicating that my destination was coming up on my left, but as I approached the location, it's not even close to what I expected. It was a small church house, with one yellow streetlight illuminating the dirt lot in front of it. I pulled into the lot and took a closer look, with my vehicle's headlights pointed at the building. The windows and door were boarded up, and definitely not recently as the wood seemed weather-worn. My blood began to run cold as I made sure my doors were locked and my windows rolled up. The full tank of gas gave me some kind of comfort in this situation. I figured she possibly made an error while typing out the address and called the number she gave me. The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service. Okay, at this point I'm ready to turn and leave, until I notice my phone alerting me that I have an email. It was a message from her. Hey, I see you're here. It's not the church. My place is the small house behind the church. All I could do was replay all of the horror movies I've seen in my life in my head, and I just couldn't believe I could possibly be living one out in real life. However, a small jolt of curiosity persuaded me forward, even if to just take a look at this house. There was a small path beside the church, and I slowly pulled into it. As I crept my car forward, a small little farmhouse poked itself out of the trees at the top of the hill. At this point, I'm certain I'm not going in there. I've made the decision in my head that my own survival took precedent over the need for sex. I was about to reverse out of there, until I saw the upstairs balcony door open. A hooded figure stepped out. I couldn't see their face, but I could tell by the posture and shape that it was a man. Despite the darkness of his facial features, I could feel that he was looking directly at me. He stood there for about 30 seconds before he motioned his head in a way I recognized as the universal signal for "look behind you." Just then, I felt the metal handle on the outside of my driver door being tugged at. I quickly turned my head in that direction to see the woman from the profile photos, hunched over and pressing her face up against the window. My heart leapt out of my chest as I stared at her horrifying smile. The best way I can describe her expression would be any creepy cartoon image of the Joker you've ever seen. It was undoubtedly her behind that insane grin, only much older. She whispered through the glass, "Open the door, baby." I was frozen in my seat, unsure of how to respond, or even what to do next. So I just sat there, continuing to stare at her like an idiot. Her face then quickly fell into an angry, malicious expression, as she continued to violently jiggle at the door handle. She then yelled at the top of her lungs, "Open this door, now." This knocked me into panic mode, and I pressed my foot to the gas, my car set to reverse. The woman tried holding onto the car handle, only to let go shortly after being dragged off her feet. I flew down the dark road towards the highway, almost triple the speed limit, just in case they had a car themselves, and decided to chase me. I called up a friend of mine who I also met on the same website. She lived in Hamilton, and insisted I come over and stay the night. When I got there, she poured me a cold glass of Coke Zero, as I explained what happened. She told me that she read in a local paper about an older couple who lured men out to their farm. I stopped her right there, as I didn't want to be more freaked out than I was already. Number 2. This is the scariest episode from my childhood. It took place in 1991, when I was 8 years old. I lived in a village on the Norwegian countryside, with my parents and 2 older brothers. There weren't many kids around for us to play with, so we always stuck together, despite the age gaps. I was 8 and my brothers were 10 and 12. It was a safe neighborhood, and we were outdoorsy kids. It was fine for us to just return home to eat and then go back out and play in the woods or go fishing in the nearby lake. In the autumn of 1991, my oldest brother dared us to sneak into an abandoned property that was located nearby. We had always thought of it as a haunted house, but really it was just an old house where the man who started the village brick factory once lived. No one had lived there for ages, and the paint was starting to peel off, and several windows were broken. Our parents would tell us to never go there. Their reason was, of course, that they feared we would get hurt playing there, but we thought it was because it was haunted. But that day, we dared to walk around in the garden. It had a now dried up pond, an old well, several old and dying fruit trees, and even tools in an old shed. It looked as if someone had just walked out one day and never bothered to return, leaving everything as it was. We soon came to think of the garden as our own, and played there all the time. We climbed the trees, used the tools to build things, and generally had a great time. Our very own secret playground. We suspected that people in the village had seen us, because soon our parents would ask us if we had gone there despite being strictly forbidden, which of course we denied, but someone must have complained. This incident happened one day in November. I remember as it was the day before my birthday. It was a damp and rainy day, and we weren't really in the mood for playing outside. But our mum had chased us out of the house so she could clean in peace, and we weren't allowed back until an hour later. So, we decided to try and open the old cellar in the abandoned house. I'm not sure what the word is in English, but imagine, if you will, a hatch that opens almost horizontally to the ground, then a few steps that lead you down into a digged-out cellar with stone walls and earth floor. It was used to store vegetables and such, but now was empty. All of us climbed down to have a look. The plan was to write our names on the inside of the cellar, sort of to make it as our own kind of thing. Suddenly, the hatch is slammed shut above us, and the cellar became completely dark. I started screaming, and my older brothers try and open the hatch. When my oldest brother, Sindre, pushed the hatch open, he saw a man's hand holding an axe. "Come on out, you trespassing little brats." Sindre shouted back, "Hell no," and slammed the hatch shut from the inside. "I know you're all in there, you little shits. Do Mummy and Daddy know where you are? Do they? I bet they don't." We heard him drop the axe and start to move around with something else. Soon we realized that he had taken out a hammer, and before we knew it, he had started to nail the hatch closed. I threw myself at the hatch, determined to get out, but the moment the hatch was open just a little bit, he reached for the axe. "Come on out. It's the better choice, really." He laughed, and we could hear that he was clearly drunk. My other brother, Emil, was pleading with the man to let us go, promising that we'd never return, but his words fell on deaf ears. The rain had started to fall really heavily now. The drunk man with the hammer was cursing and moving around outside, clearly bothered by the bad weather. "I might come back and let you out one day, or I might just butcher all three of you." He continued hammering the hatch shut. We were too terrified to do anything, but Sindre told us to keep calm and it would be okay. Surely this guy was just trying to scare us. The dark was compact inside the cellar, and it was cold and damp. After a long while of silence from the man outside, we started wondering if he had left. Sindre decided that we should count to 100 and then try to get out. We counted aloud, and then used our hands to find the hatch. It was definitely nailed shut. Sindre told us to feel the stone walls and search for a loose stone we could use. Eventually, we found one, and it was surprisingly easy to remove from its place. The cellar was old, and had not been tended to for ages, and the rainy climate of the Norwegian coastside had left the wooden hatch doors rather soft with age. The hardest thing was to reach up, since the cellar was built in such a way that it was impossible to get a good forward motion going in order to break the wood. But, fueled by panic and adrenaline, we broke the lower half open. Being lower to the ground, it was softer and easier to tear apart. We started digging the earth with our hands, creating a small opening out. Being the smallest, my brothers pushed me out of the cellar, and I could see that the man was indeed gone. My brothers were too big to fit out of the small opening, and Sindre said I would have to find the hammer and get the hatch open. I was absolutely petrified that the man would come back with the axe, and I would have to run, leaving my brothers to die or stay behind and be slaughtered. At 8 years old, I had no doubt that would have happened. I got the hammer, but I couldn't get the nails out. So I used the hammer to simply break the hatch into pieces. Soon we were all running for our lives across the garden. When we finally got home, our mum threw a fit over the state of our clothes and demanded to know what we had been up to. Unsure of what to say, we simply said nothing. We never went back there again. Hell, we never even looked that way. The man with the axe? We still have no idea who he was or where he came from. I sometimes wonder if he was a drifter, living in that abandoned house, not wanting noisy kids to disturb the peace. We never told anybody about it, but every year, when Sindre, Emil and I reunite at the family home for Christmas, We like to ask if there's been any news about the old ghost house down the street. Did anyone move in there yet? Number 3. This all happened within the last month. I have a sister-in-law who is a heroin junkie. She started on pills, but switched to heroin as it's cheaper and easier to procure. I always knew she was a selfish, rotten human being, but had no idea how sick she really was, until this. It started 3 weeks ago when I stopped by my mother-in-law's house with my 4-year-old son. He loves his Grammy, and we had a few minutes for a visit. When we arrived, she was on the phone with her daughter, and excitedly announced that little Jimmy was there to see her. She didn't mention myself being there, and continued chatting for a bit. About half an hour later, I was in the bathroom when I heard my sister-in-law show up. 2 minutes later, I go down into the kitchen where my son is supposed to be with his grandmother. No sign of him. I ask her where he is, and she tells me that her daughter has taken him out front to play. Noticing his shoes were still under the kitchen table, I pick them up and stomp outside, annoyed that she didn't bother putting them on him before going out. I step out the door, and I see her boosting my little boy into a pickup truck, a man I don't recognize behind the wheel. It's obviously one of her drug buddies. Stringy, dirty hair, skinny, haggard looking. I sprint across the lawn, grab her and push her out of the way. I scoop up my boy and I pull him out of the truck. My sister-in-law immediately starts whining that they were just taking him for ice cream, and why I have to be such a bitch. I inform her that my son is going nowhere without her even asking, especially with one of her junkie friends in a vehicle with no car seat. She calls me a few choice names and takes off with her friend. I'm given grief by my mother-in-law and my husband for being so mean to her while she's in such a fragile state. 2 weeks go by, and my husband gets a frantic call from his mother, saying that my sister-in-law is in jail again, and she has no money for bail. My husband does what he always does, and heads off to bail her out. He finds out that her bail is way beyond anything we can afford, and over the next couple of days, finds out what she has actually done. She and her junkie friend borrowed a young daughter of an old friend to take out for ice cream, but instead of going to the local DQ, they take her to a crummy motel and leave her with a man in exchange for several $100s. As they're going back to their truck to score with their newfound wealth, they're surrounded by cops, with their guns ready. Turns out that the guy in the motel was an undercover officer, originally trying to bust heroin dealers, selling out of a seedy bar that my sister-in-law frequented. I don't know how she came to offer him children in exchange for money, but the officer let her do it and set her up. Now she's exactly where she deserves to be, and I hope the judge who sentences her shows no mercy. Number 4. When my dad was growing up, my great-grandparents lived in a small farming town in Illinois. For the most part, the town was quiet and peaceful. In the mid-80s, a friend of my great-grandmother, Gina, came to her with the news that one of her sons had been found dead. He had gotten involved with drugs, and it was suspected that a gang tracked him down. The police weren't getting anywhere, so Gina decided to investigate the murder herself. One night in April, a few months after Gina's son was killed, Gina was found dead in a field. According to my great-grandmother, Gina was very close to cracking the case. However, the death was ruled as a suicide by the local police, and everyone moved on. Everybody except for my great-grandmother. Great-grandma knew pretty much everything about the case, as Gina continued to update her as she tried to solve it. So she picked up where Gina left off, and began by asking folks around town if they knew anything. One night, my great-grandparents came home from a trip to town. Great-grandma went into the house, and almost immediately heard the phone ringing. Not thinking anything of it, she picked it up and answered, On the other side of the line was a man who simply said, "If you don't mind your own business, you're going to end up in a field like your friend." He then immediately hung up the phone. The next day, my great-grandfather bought his first gun. I'm glad my great-grandmother stopped searching, and that my great-grandfather took precautions in order to protect his family. Both of my great-grandparents lived long lives, and Gina's husband ended up remarrying and moving out of state. Number 5.
This is a story that happened throughout 2015. Basically, it started off with my friend telling me to get a grip and go have some fun, so they dragged me to a gathering that was hosted by my university. Anyways, during this time, I just chatted, ate, looked at my phone, the usual. But soon I noticed this guy staring at me from afar. He was pretty tall, looked to be in his mid-20s, and honestly, he wasn't bad looking. After a while, he came over and introduced himself as Alex. Alex was nice. We spoke about our hobbies, and I told him that I practice MMA and spar in my spare time, and that I probably also spend too much time gaming, whilst he told me about his own small business he wanted to start. He was friendly, and at this time didn't give off any sort of indication that he was a creep. So, after the event, we exchanged mobile numbers and parted ways. In hindsight, this was a terrible move on my part. As I was on the train home, I received a new Facebook ad. I checked my phone and it was Alex. I shrugged. I didn't think much about it, and I accepted. I mean, I don't have a very common name, so it honestly wouldn't be hard to find me on Facebook if you typed me in. As soon as I accepted, we started chatting again, and it was basically casual and pretty normal. I won't bore you with all the details. Soon after, we both called it a night when I arrived home. The next few days, I chatted to Alex intermittently while I kept up with my studies and hobbies. He was always friendly to me and seemed quite interesting. This lasted about a week. After the initial week, my image of Alex completely changed. He began by adding a lot of innuendos to the conversation, which I brushed off at first because I thought this was him feeling more comfortable with me. Then he began to send me messages describing my body and saying things like how he wanted to have sex with me since he first saw me and how he really wanted me. I declined and told him I had a boyfriend and I would be cool with just being friends with him. Alex, of course, didn't give up and sent me photos of himself naked, as well as a lot of porn, along with questions asking if he could film himself having sex with me. I blocked him then and there on my phone, as well as on Facebook. I told my friends and they sort of laughed it off. They were basically always telling me how I'm too friendly until it's too late. Hence, I keep getting myself in these situations. Things were pretty calm for about 2 weeks, until one morning where I received a notification from Facebook letting me know that I had a message request. And boom, presto, of course, it was Alex on another account. Except this time, it wasn't porn, and it wasn't an innuendo. It was my full address. Now to clarify, Alex and I do not have any mutuals. There should be no way for him to find out my address because none of my friends at my university even know me well enough to know where I live. Needless to say, I was pretty freaked out. I told my boyfriend, who was furious with Alex, and he notified my friend's mother, who's a police officer. She lives close by, so she promised to keep an eye out. Meanwhile, Alex kept messaging me with different numbers and accounts, most of the messages containing my address and him telling me how much I turned him on and how he was going to get me one day. In a fit of stupidity and anger, I messaged him back telling him to stay the fuck away and that I would not hesitate to kick his ass if he ever laid a hand on me. He simply replied with a smiley face, and I didn't hear from him until 3 months later. So, fast forward to 3 months later. I had practically forgotten about Alex until one night in bed when my phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number asking me how I was. I replied asking who it was, and shortly after I received a text back saying, "It's Alex. Do you remember me?" I didn't reply. 5 minutes later, my phone vibrates again, and this time it says, "I'm outside. Which room is yours?" I'm surprisingly not freaked out, even though he had described my house in detail. I call my boyfriend, who lives about 15 minutes away, and he says he will be right over. I grab a sword off my rack and hang on to it in case I need it. I'm also trying to get in contact with my friend's mother, but it's practically 2 a.m. at this point, and I'm not getting through. Meanwhile, I'm still getting texts from Alex, the most vivid ones saying things like, "I just want a cute girl to be rough with." I also received lovely descriptions about how he wanted to slap me, choke me, and cum in my eyeballs. I probably shouldn't have replied, but I did, and being the hot-headed idiot I am, I sent, "Fuck off, I have a sword." He sent back, "Ha ha, I've got a knife." This didn't sit too well with me. I texted him back saying I've called the police and given them his number and told him my boyfriend was coming right over. A very short while later, I heard a car start and drive away, and my phone vibrated one more time. The message displayed itself on the screen. "Well, if you ever want sex, you know where I am." The day after, I alerted campus security, my friend's mother who filed an official report for me, and I gave them all of his details. I haven't heard from him since, and I pray 2016 is Alex free.
Number 6. My grandmother used to work as a nurse in my hometown. She enjoyed the job and got along pretty well with her co-workers. Almost every morning, she would get herself some fresh coffee from the break room, since there was a man there who always ended up making it for everyone. One day, she was getting herself some coffee as usual. Upon taking a sip of the beverage, she immediately spit it out and dumped it in the sink. When telling the story, she had told me that it tasted like there was some sugar in it, and she absolutely hates sugar in her coffee. A while later, an arrest was made on a man named Michael Swango. He was convicted of attempted murder for poisoning co-workers and patients with arsenic, as well as a variety of other poisons. So, turns out, there was never any sugar in my grandma's coffee. Ever since then, she brought her own coffee to work instead. So, thanks to my grandma's disliking for sugary coffee, she's still alive today. Number 7. On a dark, cold night in the late 70s, my dad's truck broke down about an hour from home. He started walking and put his thumb out, hitching for a ride, and was soon picked up by a middle-aged man in a brown sedan. My dad gets in the car. "Thanks, man, I appreciate the lift." The driver doesn't respond. "I'm trying to get further north. Where are you headed?" The driver again doesn't respond, but begins to drive. The driver locks the doors and puts his hand on my dad's upper thigh and squeezes. My dad was 24 or 25 years old. He worked in construction, specifically drywall. He wasn't a tall man, but he was barrel-chested and stocky. My dad turns to face him. "I'm not into that. I just need a ride." The driver doesn't move his hand. After 10 seconds of silence, my dad says, "Let me out of the car." The driver doesn't respond, doesn't even look at him. My dad grabs the hand and peels it off his thigh. "Let me out of this car, motherfucker. I will kick your fucking ass. Let me out now." My dad was ready to strike. Without a word, again without even looking at him, the driver pulls over, unlocks the doors, and my dad jumps out. The driver peels off. My dad eventually arrives home and tells everyone what happened. His family doesn't believe him. A few years later, He's dating my mum. They're watching the news, which is covering the arrest of a serial killer, the infamous John Wayne Gacy. My mum said that my dad went pale. My dad jumps out of his chair, shaking violently, started screaming and pointing at the TV. That's him. That's the guy who picked me up. My mum said she believed him immediately. My dad wasn't much of a liar or a prankster. He was rather quiet and didn't particularly crave attention. I was so intrigued by this incident that in the late 90s, I read a few books on Gacy, including the one written based on his interviews. Gacy picked up countless hitchhikers over a multi-year period in the 70s. Sometimes he would pick up hitchhikers and take them wherever they wanted to go without incident. The timeline, details, geography, MO, they're all consistent. My theory is that Gacy picked up my dad, thinking he was younger than he was, and he then tested out my dad's reaction. My dad was a bit older than Gacy's target age, which was around 18 to 20. When my dad fought back aggressively and immediately, Gacy figured he wasn't worth the trouble, and also possibly realized that my dad was not as young as he looked. A few years ago, my partner and I went to an event, and we started chit-chatting with a couple sitting at our table. For some reason I can't remember, I'd told this story. The female half of the couple turned white, mouth agape. She said that her uncle has an almost identical Gacy encounter. I'm just so sad for the ones who weren't able to escape. Number 8. This happened when I was 11. My brothers and I had not long started at a new school. 3 days a week, Mum would drop us off, and on the other 2 days we caught the bus. On this particular day, Mum dropped us off. As soon as she pulled up, I spotted a man standing at the only gate into the school. Apparently, no one else thought that was creepy. I begged my mum to drop us out the back, but she was late for work and wouldn't listen. I waited for Mum to drive off, and then told my brothers, who were 9 and 6, to do exactly what I said without question. They nodded, and we walked towards the gate. I placed myself between the man and my brothers, making sure I got a good look at him. He was about 6 foot, dark brown hair, tattoo sleeve down his right arm, wearing a black skin-tight t-shirt and camo shorts. As we walked past him, I noticed something that makes my heart skip a beat. In his hands, close to the school gate, was a pocket knife he was flipping in and out. At that point, priority number 1 was to get my brothers somewhere safe. I made them walk quickly in front of me to the library. I told them not to leave the library until I came back to get them. I then made my way to the teacher's office through the staff door. My teacher, Mrs. Muddle, stopped me and tried to make me go back to the front door of the school to the office. I looked at her and said, "There's a man in front of the school with a knife." She could see I was serious and let me through. The cops were called, who were quick to show up and arrest the guy. Lunchtime that same day, I was called to the principal's office. Before I could even ask what I had done this time, I was pulled into a hug by some random lady who couldn't stop thanking me for saving her son's life. Turns out, the guy was the father of one of the students who had been physically abusing the kid and his mother. When she decided to leave him and stop him from seeing his son, he decided he was going to kidnap and kill the boy. Because, as he saw it, if he couldn't have him, no one could. Number 9. This happened when I was about 12 or 13 years old. My parents and I were going on a trip for a couple of days, and while they were getting stuff from inside the house, they told me to stay outside and watch the car. It was daylight, and this was a safe neighborhood. I'm outside for a couple of minutes, sitting on the lawn, and I see a pickup truck pull up across the street, and this old-looking man gets out of the truck and comes towards me. I get up, and he starts telling me that he sells homemade chairs, and that he has one on the back of his truck that he wants to show me. He seemed off to me, so I told him I was going to ask my parents. So I'm rushing to the door, and I start knocking since our door locks automatically. My mum comes out, and I tell her what the man told me, but he interrupts me and tells her I called him over, or that I needed help or something like that. My mum knew this was a lie. She told him that she was going to call the cops, and he promptly left. My dad had to calm her down since she was freaking out and thinking that the guy was going to take me, and after she was calm, we continued putting the things in the car. The weird part of this was when the man's car was following us for a while later. My dad was so pissed off that he braked the car, pulled over to the side, and actually tried to follow the man's car and get his plate number. The man sped away, so we lost him by then, and it left us pretty scared for a few months since he knew where we lived. Even though it's been a few years, I still don't like being alone outside anymore. Number 10.
I went out with a guy for 3 months. He seemed really sweet, but he began doing the control thing. He wanted to tell me how to dress, act, who to be friends with, so I cut him out. We were 15, so it wasn't even a huge deal to me. He acted like he was okay with it. I forgot all about him. Then about 3 years later, I met him at a party. He recognized me and said I was still just like he remembered, which I guess was a compliment. He commented on the length of my shorts and asked if your man let you out in those. Stupidly, I told him I didn't have a boyfriend. Later, after the alcohol had worn off, I decided to head home. My friend told me I could sleep in the guest room, so I did. I woke up to someone on top of me. I'm not sure how I knew it was him, but I did. I guess his weight felt familiar. He reached across me to turn on the light, and he had a kitchen knife in his hand. He said he was going to mark me so that no one else would touch me. I could tell he was drunk. He said he did it to all the other girls he was with. I started to scream. He backed off, told me to shut up, and ran out of the room. The police picked him up 3 blocks over, trying to break into someone's shed to hide. I have not seen him since.
Number 11. This happened about 2 weeks ago, while I was walking from my building to where my aunt works. The city I'm in is a medium-sized one, and I don't have a very long walk to her building, but it's still a good 2 blocks away. A bit of background on myself first. I'm a transgender guy, female to male, and I pass rather well for someone who isn't on hormones. However, due to not being out to my family, I often wear women's jackets and neutral clothing, which can be a bit confusing for some people. That day, I had chosen to wear a purple jacket and a matching hat, and from a distance, I could be mistaken for a female. I was walking alone, like usual, when I heard footsteps racing up towards me from behind, which is unusual. There really wasn't anyone else walking outside at this hour. I shrug it off, until I feel someone grab my shoulder and turn me around. A very large man was there, and there was a truck nearby. He seemed surprised to see me though, and immediately let me go once he got a good look at my face. He ran to the truck, and someone drove him away, and I ran the rest of the way to my aunt's office. Later that evening, the same man was on the news for an attempted abduction of a young girl in that area, just a few blocks away from where he grabbed me. Number 12. So, this is currently happening to me. It's been going on for close to 3 weeks now. I decided to make a profile on the dating website Plenty of Fish, because I've been single for 8 months now, and I have friends who've had successes on there before. I figured, why not? About a month after signing up, I got a message from a very attractive girl, and we actually got along very well. We talked for a few weeks, until we decided to exchange our kicks. That's where everything took a turn for the worse. Within only 4 messages, she revealed to me that her profile pictures were fake, and proceeded to send me new ones, saying, "This is me. I swear I'm not fake, I promise." The pictures were of a girl who looked too good to be true, so being a huge fan of the show Catfish, I did a reverse image search, and sure enough, I found the real girl. I told her what I found, so she did it again. Same thing, not her. At this point, I got fed up, and told her to never talk to me again. She became extremely angry. She starts calling me every name in the book, telling me she's a stripper and would pleasure me anytime I wanted, and that I lost out. I started getting messages from new accounts on both Plenty of Fish and Kick, all claiming to be her friend or someone who works with her. They all typed the same way she did, and I just knew deep down they were all her. These friends started sending me messages, threatening me, saying, "I know where you live. Her dad'll beat the shit out of you." But the one that made my heart drop said, "I know you live in Pine Ridge. That's my neighborhood." It went on every day. I would get up to 30 kicks a day from her, never replying to any of them. I got sick of it, so I made my Instagram private, deleted Facebook, took down my profile and made a new kick. About 5 days went by. I got a new message on my new kick. It was a picture from a username called Killer2 Coming For You. When I opened it, I almost pissed myself. It was a picture of my house from across the street. I could see the window to my room with the light on. I called the cops, and long story short, they didn't take me very seriously. They told me they can't do anything because she hasn't physically harmed me yet, which I think's bullshit. I've been sleeping with a knife under my pillow ever since. Thankfully, she hasn't done anything yet, but just a few hours ago, I got a new message on Kick, swearing hardcore, saying things like, "Fuck you, fuck your dad, fuck your mum, you're a fucking loser." Me being curious, I decided to sign into my old Kick, and sure enough, 10 new messages. They were all saying how she loved me, but now she's pregnant and has a boyfriend, but how she still loves me and wants to raise the baby boy with me. Sure enough, she sent a new picture of a pregnant woman with a caption at the bottom saying, "Proof that I'm pregnant." I reverse image searched it. There's thousands of sites with that picture. Every day I'm living in fear. I'm gonna make a new kick tonight, but she seems to find them easily. I'll keep you guys updated on this. Please wish me luck. Hi guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Originally, I wanted this to be more romance specific, crazy stalkers and exes and dating stories, and there's a few of them in the mix, but turns out there wasn't that many to go around, so it's a more general, varied list, which is good as well, A big thank you to Edom for helping me narrate a couple of these. I thought it was nice to get a female perspective on some of these stories, mix things up and enhance the good times, the good vibes. Stick around for some bloopers at the end. I'm gonna put some in. I'm in that jolly mood. Anyway, for all of you budding romantics out there, happy Valentine's Day. And for all you forever aloners, well, at least don't feel so bad, because I'll always be here for you, whispering sweet nothings into your ears late at night. Destroy that like button if you don't want to be possessed by Abaddon, our Dark Lord, and I'll have another video for you guys very, very soon. Stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. She was a gorgeous woman, very fit, with firm legs and long breasts. Wow, so gorgeous. You and all your dangly long boobs. and firm legs. But unfortunate accidents can happen to anyone. Right? 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 Right. Oh, this particular story is going to have a lot of bloopers. I can just tell. Oh, no. Hell no. Hell no. Oh, hell no. Oh, hell no, Sindre shouted back. Fuck that shit.